This story is titled, I Caught My Partner Lying About Being at Work When They Were Actually Out with Someone Else. I never thought I'd be telling this story. My name is Ellen, I'm 52 years old, and I've been with my partner Mark for nearly 2 decades. We built a life together, steady, dependable, the kind of life where you know what to expect. Or at least, I thought I did. We live in a quiet little town in Pennsylvania, the kind where neighbors still wave at each other, where routine is comfort, and where secrets don't stay buried for long. Mark has always been a man of habit. Up at 6, coffee with exactly 2 sugars, out the door by 7, home by 6:30. Reliable, trustworthy. Or so I believed. But one evening, as I set the table for dinner, my phone buzzed, a text from my friend Karen. "Hey, is Mark working late? Thought I saw him at the new steakhouse on Elm." Looked like he was with someone. I laughed, shaking my head. Karen must have been mistaken. Mark had told me that morning he'd be swamped at work, staying late to catch up on paperwork. It wasn't unusual, he'd done it before. But something about Karen's message wouldn't leave me alone. I texted back, "Are you sure it was him?" Her response was immediate. "Pretty sure. He was sitting in a booth by the window, had his back to me, but it looked like him. And the woman with him? Not a coworker, unless your husband suddenly has candlelit meetings now." My hands trembled as I set my phone down. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to stay calm. This had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe Karen was wrong. But doubt had already wedged itself deep inside me. Mark came home an hour later, just like he always did. He kissed my cheek, loosened his tie, and sat at the dinner table like nothing had changed. "How was work?" I asked, watching his face carefully. He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Exhausting. So much paperwork, I barely left my desk." A lie. A perfect, practiced lie. I didn't say anything that night. I needed proof. So the next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through his phone. I knew his password. Of course I did. We'd never had secrets. At least, I thought we hadn't. But as I scrolled through his messages, my stomach turned. There it was. A thread with a number I didn't recognize. A message from just last night, after he'd supposedly been drowning in paperwork. "Had a great time tonight. Can't wait to see you again." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My world tilted. My hands shook and suddenly I couldn't breathe. I forced myself to read more. More texts, more lies, plans for lunches, miss you messages, and photos. Nothing explicit, but enough to make my stomach churn. A woman, blonde, younger than me, smiling in dimly lit restaurants. I put his phone back before he could notice. That night, I barely touched my food. Mark chatted about his day like everything was normal, like he wasn't tearing my heart apart piece by piece. I stared at him, wondering how long he'd been lying to me. Days? Weeks? Years. I needed to know the truth. So the next day, I followed him. It felt ridiculous at first, like something out of a bad movie. A middle-aged woman in an old sedan, tailing her own husband. But desperation makes you do things you never imagined. He left for work at 7, just like always. But instead of driving straight to the office, he took a detour. I followed, pulse pounding, and when he pulled into a cafe across town and walked inside, I parked a block away and waited. 10 minutes later, she arrived. Blonde, just like in the photos. She slid into the seat across from him, laughing at something he said. And then, he reached across the table and took her hand. That was it. A switch flipped inside me. The grief, the confusion, the fear. It all turned to ice. I took a deep breath, stepped out of my car, and walked straight into the cafe. His back was to me. He didn't see me coming. But she did. Her laughter died on her lips as her eyes widened. "Mark," I said, voice steady. He froze. Slowly he turned, and when his gaze met mine, the color drained from his face. "Ellen?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. I looked at the woman. "Who is she?" She opened her mouth, then shut it. She didn't need to answer. "I already knew," Mark stammered. "I can explain." I held up a hand. "No, I think I've heard enough." The cafe was silent. Every conversation had died around us. People were watching, but I didn't care. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking. Mark swallowed hard. "Ellen, please, can we—" "How long?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "A few months." "A few months. A few months of lies. A few months of sneaking around, of looking me in the eye and telling me he loved me while he was with her." I turned to the woman. "Did you know he was married?" She hesitated. And that was all the answer I needed. I nodded slowly. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the cafe. Mark followed. "Ellen, please, just talk to me." I stopped in the parking lot and turned to face him. "Why, Mark?" My voice cracked. "Why did you do this?" He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something I hadn't expected: shame. "I don't know," he whispered. "It just happened. It just happened. Like it was an accident. Like he tripped and fell into another woman's arms." I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "No, Mark, you made a choice. Over and over again, you chose her." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I was going to tell you," he said, his voice desperate. I was trying to figure out how." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right. You were going to tell me. Right after another candlelit dinner, I'm sure." He flinched. I took a deep, shuddering breath. "I don't think I can do this, Mark. I don't think I can forgive you." His face crumpled. "Ellen, please. It was a mistake. I love you. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to be a clenched stomach, a pounding heart, a phone full of secrets." I turned away. "I need time." And then I walked away. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of our life together. The first time we met, the way he used to look at me, the years we built something I thought was unshakable. Now, it all felt like a cruel joke. Mark had been my safe place. The man I trusted with my heart, my future. And in one afternoon, I had watched it all unravel. By the time I got home, exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave. I sat in our quiet kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Mark usually sat. The weight of his betrayal pressed down on me, suffocating. Then came the rage. I wasn't just sad. I was furious. Furious that he had looked me in the eye and lied. Furious that he had taken away my peace, my security. Furious that he had let me believe in a love that no longer existed. When Mark finally came home that evening, his face was etched with regret. He walked in cautiously, like he wasn't sure if I'd throw something at him. "Ellen," his voice was soft, pleading. I stood up, arms crossed. "Did you see her today?" His eyes darted to the floor. "No." "Do you love her?" His breath hitched, and I knew the answer before he spoke. "I don't know." My heart cracked. Not because I wanted him to say he loved me, but because he was still unsure. Even now, after getting caught, after watching me break, he didn't know. That was enough for me. I exhaled, feeling strangely calm. "I need space, Mark. I need you to leave." His head snapped up. "Ellen, please, we can fix this." I shook my head. "No, Mark, you made a choice, and now I'm making mine." For the first time in years, I was choosing myself. He looked like he wanted to fight, but then his shoulders sagged. He nodded slowly, defeated. "I'll go stay with my brother for a while." I didn't respond. As he packed a bag, I sat in the living room, staring at nothing. This wasn't how I imagined my life. I never thought I'd be 52 and questioning everything. But as Mark walked out the door, suitcase in hand, a strange sense of relief washed over me. This wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of something else. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out what that was. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you've ever been in a situation like this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Ellen's shoes? Let me know below.